I want to make sure you all take note, and I may even say something about this again later. I am here today because of the Mid-Atlantic Foundation. I've been here, I don't know how many other times, because of the Mid-Atlantic Foundation. And what Jack and this foundation does, and many, many of our other foundations that I work with, I think is incredible work on behalf of the churches. A lot of times as we go around and work with churches in all arenas of stewardship, issues will come up like, well, yeah, we may talk to our foundation about this, but we've got a bank in town we want to talk to. And so-and-so's a broker with Merrill Lynch, or so-and-so's got a Smith Barney, or I think Smith Barney's gone now. But anyway, somebody else. And so we want to just compare all these things, apples to apples here. And frequently the only thing that's said was, okay, in comparison with this benchmark and this exactly how did you do here, 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 here. And that's a fair thing to ask people doing investments. But I do not want any of you to lose sight of the fact it is not Smith Barney who took their profits and invited me here today. It's not Merrill Lynch. It's not the bank or anyone else who is trying to give back to the United Methodist Church in a way to strengthen your churches. Nor should they. That's not their responsibility. Their responsibility is to give back to their shareholders, to make them profit, and not a thing in the world wrong with that. But this foundation is particularly adept, and others are also very good at taking what is in their perusal to dispose of. See, they're not a member, they don't belong to the annual conference. They're separate. They have chosen by their separate board to give back to the church. And I just think they need applause for that. They don't all do it, and the Mid-Atlantic does it really, really well. So I would hope perhaps you could go back into your churches, and when this kind of discussion's coming up, say, let's remember that it's all not apples to apples, because where are the profits spent on whatever is made off of us as a church? What happens to that? And yes, Jack gets paid and his staff, but they are paid to return goods and services to you. And stuff like this. So there we go. Were you raising your hand, or are you just exercising?
I hope for the church that I serve right now move all their CDs into the Mid-Atlantic Fund. It's been a great move for us.
Good deal. Good deal. Now if you can get them to, they're not in CDs at Mid-Atlantic, are they?
No.
Good. Okay.
It's in real stuff.
Good for you, Jack. Okay. All right. Let's move on. The CD wouldn't have been a bad place to be the last couple of days, but let's hope that's not a good long-term investment. All right, some do's and don'ts in preparing to compete. Remember, the idea is you need to help your church people understand we are competing. And a number of your older finance members are not going to grasp that. They're still under the impression that people will give out of obligation and responsibility. They are competing. And here, what we're going to talk about here the next hour or so are some do's and don'ts of that. You've got to compete with your mission. I heard several of the tables talking about mission and what we do with that. And one said, we've got to have a mission statement. Yes, you need a statement of mission. But as equally important, every single person must know it. And be constantly reminded of it. In reference, in worship, in placards on the wall, in notations at the bottom of stationery, as headlines on websites. The mission must be constantly up there, and it must be short and succinct and rememberable. That they know what it is about. When I went to war with the 1st Armored Division, we had a mission statement for what we as an Army were to do. Now you would think, dadgum, I mean, that's the whole dadgum U.S. Army. This has got to be a pretty big deal. You know, you are to remove the forces of Saddam Hussein, the Iraqi army from the sovereign nation of Kuwait by any means possible. Period. So everything we did went back, okay, is this going to help us get the Iraqi army out of Kuwait? It all went back there. Everything. Every time it went back. Does this help us do that mission? Like it or not, this is not up for debate. It has been determined. This is the mission. It all went back there. You know, will you having, a little more comfortable place to sleep help us get Saddam Hussein quicker out of Kuwait? If it didn't affect the mission, it wasn't done. That's first and foremost where we need to go. What is your ultimate bottom line? Here's how we're going to measure who we are mission. And let me encourage you to make that the guiding principle and to be at the head of every board meeting, council meeting, whatever governing meeting you have. The first thing noted in there should be the mission. Preacher, thank you for the prayer. We are now reminded as we open the meeting that our mission here at First Church is, and let us hear our reports now in regards to how they are helping us fulfill the mission. And that's what everything you do goes back to. This will help you in an appropriate way to remind people that they are not the reason the church exists. It ain't about you, Aunt Hazel. Now, you probably won't want to say it exactly like that. Aunt Hazel, thank you for that. Can you help us understand how changing the bathrooms from pink to purple will help us fulfill the mission? Oh, we hear you like purple better. Understand. We got folks like blue, This is the kind of junk we get into in our churches, is it not? And we get bogged down or sidetracked, and this happens more on the side than in public. On the side, it's, preacher, listen. Uncle Joe is really ticked off about this. I think we can calm him down if we'll do this, if we'll do that. You're on safe ground to say, I hate to hear Uncle Joe's upset. What can we do about it that will not affect the mission? You just keep coming back like a broken record. It's not me. It's not my career. It's not my job. It's the mission. That will give you some hope of getting them back focused and centered on what ultimately it's all about. The mission is what the nonprofits constantly sell. Boy Scouts, they're going to keep selling that they've taken kids at this age and grown them up and taught them a multitude of skills to be better young men at this age. And the Red Cross, we're constantly preparing for a disaster, and when it happens, we were able to do the following, etc. Our mission is to be prepared to do that. It's all focused around that, and they're selling that they're doing that. What's your mission? And then you go sell it that you're doing it. And to do that, you're going to need a missional budget. Now, how many of you are already somewhat in tune with the missional or narrative budget? You're using it, etc. Raise hands. All right. How many of you are still somewhat still centered around the line item budget? Okay, it's about 50-50. Okay. How many of you folks using the line item budget are ready to quit? Okay, it wasn't enough. Okay, now we're getting there. You need to. You need to. If you've read the books, and Jack said, everybody's read all your books. I do not believe that. I believe all of you were given books. Or did you give them? They give them to you? Did you buy them? They gave them to you. You probably would have read them if you'd had to buy them. But this, friends, is a line item budget. Now, you can't see a bottom line total budget. It says $200,000, and that's a little hard to read. But does that not look something like what you print out? I mean, your budget may be $500,000 or it may be $100,000, but it's somewhat broken down like this. You got income and you have expenses, you have programs and staff and conference items, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Isn't that sort of what you do? But look at this like your donors look at it. Okay? What does Bubba Donor, who's not at church every day, he's a plumber, he comes to church, pretty decent, brings the little woman and the kids. He's not in the center focus of church, does go to Sunday school on occasion, likes the barbecues, does a few things. But he's one of those members. And he gets this from you, and you want money from him because that's when you shared this with him, right? And what does Bubba see? Because Bubba's a plumber. He understands budgets. Bubba has a budget in his plumbing business. And here's what he sees. He sees that the preacher makes $50,000 a year because y'all are in the Northeast, not down south where a preacher would be making. He sees you're paying a preacher's utility bill. What gives with that? Nobody pays his utility bill. Why are we paying the preacher's utility bill? The preacher has an expense account. Wonder what that's used for. And then the music director. You get up there and play piano and you get $10,000 a year to get up there and just sit on the piano bench. Big deal. And $127,000. My money is just propping up people. That's what it's doing. And then my money is over here propping up a building, paying their utility bill too at $8,000 a year. Maintaining it at $5,000. Well, I'm glad I did come fix them toilets last year. But I donated my services to fix the toilets. And they still got $5,000. I bet that stupid electrician's one charged them most of that stuff. Because, Lord, $35,000 is propping up a building and keeping it in order. My gosh almighty, about the only thing we're really doing is propping up buildings and people. That's what that looks like. That is what that says. Now, how many of you are excited about propping up buildings and people? Not anybody here. And y'all are pretty decent church people, too. You can imagine how Bubba Donor, the plumber, feels, right? So instead, you send this to Bubba. Bubba's reading this thing. We're changing lives for Christ. Church leadership's got this. What are we doing? Our plan? We're going to provide meaningful, life-changing worship. Yeah, worship up there's been pretty good this year, and I sure want that to keep going. We had 112 worship services. No, 112. Is there 190 people up there on Sunday mornings? I'll be darned. 14 of them gave their life to Christ. Now, that's something we ought to be doing. That's a good thing. 9 of them rededicated. Special music. Easter music was good. That was good stuff. And there were 100 people here who were unchurched. Shoot, we got folks from the community turned out for that. And next year they're adding this junior choir. Well, hallelujah for that. Finally, little Madeline's going to have her choir. But she can sing, boy, she can sing. That's great. And already they're going to sing on Palm Sunday. Oh, that's a neat, sir. I like that. And the praise team is being trained. Oh, my gosh. Well, I guess it's okay. Another one of them shake your booty for Jesus services. And we're going to increase attendance to 200 in our church, 220 people. I'll be darned. And they're doing all that for $80,000? Oh my gosh, what a deal. 112 worship services. And a new choir for my daughter, and they do all that for $80,000. You see, that's the cost of worship. You took that line item budget. To do worship, you have to turn on lights, heat. You know, there's parts of the world use air conditioning. Snow removal services. Never heard. I had no idea what that was. But the preacher's salary. Preacher, how much of the preacher's time is devoted to worship? Sermon prep. Getting it together. How many hours? 10? 15? Okay, so you take 25% of the preacher's salary because it's pretty hard to have worship without a preacher. So what we're paying, that's where the preacher's utilities go and preacher's insurance, because all that's a part of the cost of having a preacher. So what does a preacher do? Preacher does worship for us. So you put those percentages in, that music director, take that salary and put it there because 95% of what they're doing applies to worship. And so that's where that goes. And all of that tremendous activity, which is certainly a part of your mission, is holding regular weekly worship, is done for $80,000. Now, Bubba thinks that's a deal. And he's eager to support it. And then the other breakdowns of what you're doing in education and in mission, and et cetera, the areas of your church of where it's working, that's what you're sharing with them, and you're taking pieces and percentages off your line item budget. And then as you distribute that to folks with pictures and diagrams and whatever else and things to excite them, that are showing them what your mission is, because the number one reason that they give money is because of impact and the belief in your mission. You're telling them, here's how we're doing the mission so you can believe in it and you want to give to it. That's what they see. Now on the bottom, if you're interested in a line item budget that's in the office, and you may come by and inquire, and we'll be happy to give you one. Not being secretive. But how many of your members really want it? No. Very few church people really want to get into the weeds with what you're paying for utilities. They don't care. They want them paid. But they don't want to get into that. They just want to know it's done. What they're interested in is, how good's the worship service? What are we doing in the community? How many lives have we touched? What's happening with the young people around? You tell them that. That's what this does. They want to see it, they can. You'll have a couple of people come by the office. I want to see the line item budget. They want to cause trouble. You know it and I know it. That's okay. You're just focusing on the mission. Any questions on a missional budget? How many of you are going to use missional budgets in 2015 to communicate with your congregations? How many of you are going to stay with the line item budget? The rest of you are doing nothing. Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell me how this lines up with your concept of having targeted communication with people? Because it seems like all of this is about explaining to people why they need to give, sort of justifying, and which is kind of...
Well, it's explaining what your church is doing.
Right.
Yes.
But I think it's helping people to sort of connect with why they need you also going forward, right?
That's right. The targeted communication.
Right.
In other words, that is done within a letter in a specific target format. They're getting the same brochure.
Right.
You're saying some different things about how you want them to respond in a letter or another address to them. That's where you adjust it and you target it. This is the whole church's mission.
Right.
And When you're targeting folks, and let us say in your letter, this is going out to the person who, as far as you know, was an Easter Christmas attendee and gave you, $20 in the plate, if anything. And you're sending that to that family. Your request in that letter may say to them, we really hope you'll join in supporting this mission, with a commitment of $5 a week. That's how you adjusted that communication to them. And you may have adjusted some, you may have made some pastoral reference in there, et cetera, to them. To the tither, that letter goes out saying, we wanted you to see all of what we hope to do, much of which would be impossible without your incredible generous support that you have been doing in our church throughout this past year. And we certainly hope you'll continue. And what a joy to be your pastor. And if I can ever serve you, let me, You're doing more of a thank you to them, and you're making an appeal to these others for $5 a week because you have a shot at that. Some others perhaps is in there, and we're saying, we hope you'll explore as our church is growing how you personally can grow in your giving and look at increasing to such and such or moving to a tithe. So you've segmented out specific communications for how you want them to respond in a way they might do it. That help you? Okay. Yes, sir?
I think I'm in the same line as that question. Is the missional budget attractive to all different generations? Do you want to send a missional budget to the World War II generation? Do you want to send it to
Yes.
the young?
Yes.
But you're modifying it along the way.
Not the budget. Not the budget, the letter. The cover that goes with it and the communique. This isn't going to turn the World War II guy off. He's fine. He probably doesn't need it, but it doesn't hurt him at all. With almost everybody underneath him, it's helpful. But it's hurtful to none.
We talked privately, and I think it'd be helpful for everyone, is what would you recommend in terms of an implementation plan for beginning that process? Where do you start? What's the timeline, and what would you do?
Okay, an implementation plan of moving from a line item budget to a missional budget.
Yes.
Okay. With most, why am I having trouble saying most today? With most changes that deal with your church shifting something it has done for perhaps decades to something else, and the sending out of a line item budget may be very ingrained in the minds of your folks as the way in which we need to be transparent with what we do. It's going to take some levels of discussion that, again, I believe are best done in small groups that get larger. That you have a core who understand. If this was something I wanted to move to, I might in the next few weeks get a core of real leaders and say, this year in our communication as we do about the upcoming 2016 budget, I've been reading and looking at making this shift. And let me show you some examples. You can use the examples in the book or whatever. Here is different ways to do it. I want our people to understand our ministry, and I've about decided when they look at a line item budget, they cannot understand what we're doing in ministry. I want that described in ways they really can understand. Don't want to be untransparent, so I want them to know they can come get it. You get the support of that group, which gets a larger group, which finally gets the board or council, and then you go forward. With an understanding that when it comes to stuff like this, outside of that, almost nobody cares. The people in the pew are not going to be shook up about this like they would if you wanted to suddenly go from having an 11 o'clock worship service to changing that to 10. Now you're shaking up everybody. But this is mostly an issue for a handful of leaders, and I think you could stair-step that, probably get full concurrence to move to that. And then I would say, let's do that this year. You all be kind of listening out in your small groups. Get back. If a lot of folks say, oh, this is terrible, I wanted that line item budget, we can crank that thing out through the copier and mail it if we need to. But I really think this is going to be more helpful.
During the transition, as you're moving from one to the other, why would it hurt? How would it hurt to have both? The line item we could be prepared to explain how the line item is represented in the narrative, And then as you get to the point where only the narrative is needed, and you always have the line item because that's what you're.
The line item budget for those not fully in the know in church, new Christians, folks just coming in, can be very difficult to interpret at all and can be very distracting to even what may be beside it. So I would prefer that it not be sort of sent together, but that it is available, not a secret, but it's available, that if you really want it, very few of your new people are going to get up there and say, I want to see exactly what the preacher makes. And I just want all this happening. Many times I've worked with church treasurers who told me what it was like the first year they became the church treasurer. And they said, it was a very disheartening experience. I just had no idea how many didn't give, who gave what, the big talker that never, backed it up. I saw what was in the weeds, and it really bothered me a lot. And I think this is the distribution of something, of getting in the weeds, that if you're trying to figure this Christian thing out and get acquainted with Jesus, can hurt that process instead of help it. So, one more and then I'm going to go on.
Can you say a little bit more about the who and the how of translating the line item budget into the missional narrative budget, deciding what percentage of the pastor's package represents this or that, or what percentage of the building represents what?
I would take either myself as the pastor or a key top staff person should take responsibility for getting that. Don't get super deep in the weeds with this. We got to call the electric company and have them put a specific meter on Sunday mornings that we can specifically tell exactly how much power is going into, so we can factor that percentage in. Oh, geez. That's ridiculous. Maybe you have somebody who knows what they're doing. They can do some kind of reading on Sunday morning, read it after it's over and give you a quick guess. Or maybe you can just guess and figure there's a ton of lights going on Sunday morning and there's about 6 on during the week. But that gets beyond the point. How much of your time's in the sermon? The only way I know how to get that, say, preacher, how much time do you spend getting ready for worship? Secretary, how much time do you spend, and take their word for it, gather it up? Janitor, how long does it take to clean a sanctuary? A whole day on Monday, then I'm taking 1/5 of that salary. I think that's got to be, you can't do it by committee. I think you put it together with a couple of folks who do the best they can. You may share that with the committee responsible for communication and getting it out, but you do it that way. Don't bog down. I said just one more, but all right. One more.
With regard to the what it costs you on Sunday morning for something specific or any other event, it's really not that hard. You get the trustees and figure out your total square footage of the building, and you figure out how much of it is used when, and you factor that across all of your expenses and insert it in the bill.
Okay, so if you kind of want to know about doing that, there's your man. Was it really? Is it a goodie? Okay, you're just,
I think it is.
all right.
So I want to just hear your response to this. There have been many Octobers where we don't present a budget to the congregation at all.
Yes.
And we are really just talking about giving as a spiritual act of their relationship with God.
Yes.
All of that. And maybe we present a budget in January or February.
Okay.
It's this
That's your budget. Yes.
Is that, how do you feel about that?
Well, the question was, we don't send out a budget. You don't have pledges. Your people give, etc. So,
They pledge in October.
oh, they do that in October, but you do not. You're not sharing with them in October our plans for 2016 or whatever.
Not really, not that much. It's more about your need to.
Is it working for you?
Yeah.
Okay, then I'd stay with it, and I would have this available, printed, and done as a means of saying, here's how we will be distributing and using your ministry dollars in the upcoming year. Yeah. I think it's a marvelous tool to help you. You can have pie charts and different stuff, play with it and make it colorful and helpful. But this is so much better than saying we spend this for staff, we spend this on administration, we send this to the annual conference, and it gets down to, well, what do we spend on children's, education? Oh, almost nothing. Well, that's not exactly what things are about here. So this is a much better way to do it. You've got to compete with vision. What are you called to be? You need to have God talk and not numbers talk. Some scientific research has been done on charitable giving and was printed out this week to show people's responses to how they want to give. And it showed that one of the worst things you can do is to put numbers in the request. Numbers being, here's how bad off we are. Or we need a 5% increase, et cetera, et cetera. That drives nothing. What drives it is the heart. Giving is far more of the emotion than it is of the head. And that's what drives it. And what should drive us to want to do anything is God's call to us. It is that God has called us that we talk about. And that's what we do too little. We talk too much about what the church needs and not what God wants. It should begin with God wants. Now, if your conclusion is God wants us to work really hard to stay just like we are, then that's what we work really hard to do. Let's try hard to stay just like we are. But there's nothing in Scripture I can find that was the personality of our God. Yes, ma'am?
How do we stay transparent about the realities of where we are? Because sometimes that's numbers, but also use God talk. People want to know, so they want to know where behind.
That's right. That's fine. That's fine. Now, hey, we had 100 in worship last year, and this year that's down to 90. And as I have looked at what God wants from us, as I have prayed to God, God has not said to me, He wants me to be in hospice ministry and to remain here to help us die. I am hearing God say there can be new life here. I am hearing God say there are places we need to go and be. There's things we need to do. And we're going to have to change to meet God's request to do that, or we will just be dying. So it quickly gets back to what God wants you to do, not what we've got to do is to get back to where we've got another 10 people in worship. So now our strategy here, what we're going to do, this Sunday school class, you all are to bring one more person, and you're to do, and it gets down to like our goal is 10 people. The goal is to follow what God's calling us to be, which will lead us to disciples, but just finding a 10 or getting a bottom line of a number is not the goal. You with me? Okay. All right. Yes, sir.
Sarah, what's your approach to a congregation that wants to print the giving for last week and the percentage of the budget compared to last year?
Now, what do you think it is?
I guess my question is...
Did you read anything I wrote? Busted. Oh.
I guess my question is it worth the fight to take it out of the bulletin, or you leave it in the bulletin and not worry about it?
Yes, it's worth the fight. But you don't have to go to Jerusalem necessarily. And I want you to hear that on a lot of things. I mean, there's nothing I'm saying to you that is just not worth it, or I wouldn't say it. But, it's worth it to degrees. Absolutely, it should be changed. That's one of the slides coming up. So when we get there, I'm going to come sit out there and you can come stand up here. Putting financial data in the worship bulletin, be it good, bad, or indifferent, is bad.
Yes.
No one should be coming there hoping to find out what the financial condition of the church is. They should be coming there knowing that their spiritual condition is terrible. And they're hoping to have it improved and fixed upon. And that's what they're there for. And that's what we should be focusing on being there for. And we don't need to distract them with anything otherwise. Nobody wakes up on Sunday and says, honey, hurry up. We got to get down and see how the church did last week with its money. So don't do it. Massive turnoff to new people. Huge turnoff to new people. To go in there and before the preacher even opens his or her mouth to make an impression, you've made an impression by showing that you're $40,000 in the hole financially. And they're thinking, thank God we found a bankrupt church to join. Doesn't help. The only argument I ever hear, and I know all of you have probably either have or had finance committees who say, but we want our people to know. That's fine. We will find other ways. We will send each member family an email update. We will put it on our website every week behind a pass-protected click. Okay, everybody in the church is frequently told, by the way, if you want to look at this, the password click on our website is the church name. Real simple to remember. But somebody who just moved to town and is looking you up doesn't see the church financial condition right off. So there's ways to be transparent with members, not hide it, but you don't put it out there for the whole public to see in an instrument that just has no business with it being there. Okay. You buy that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I've got a 20-page bulletin. I've been trying to trim it for years.
20 pages worth.
It's crazy.
Killing trees.
Okay. Wow. Okay. You may have more problems than just that. Okay, let me get back here and say this is where I think our clergy have a huge role to play. Of all the people in the church, we are the ones who ought to continuously be invoking God's name. But God is who we work for. But God is what we listen to. Prayer should precede this decision. ... But too often we get sucked in to the secular world and we say things like, well, we shouldn't really enter into a capital campaign when the stock market is down by 6% this year. Okay, that sounds kind of like some business deduction. Okay? Do you honestly believe God is saying, wow, I didn't even think about that when I planted that idea for that new building? Or maybe God said, even I didn't know what the market was going to do. So boy, I'm sure glad you second-guessed my desire for you to add a children's ministry here. If God is saying do this, and that's what we should argue. If we have bankers or stockbrokers or whoever else in our churches who want to say, preacher, how can we think about this when we've got unemployment? How can we think about this with this plant going? How can we? And said, I'll admit honestly to you, I didn't get a degree in economics. Mine is in theology. And this has come to me in times of prayer and discernment that I'm sensing God wants us to do more than we are doing. And I'm just wondering if I've been kind of like the reluctant one who's a little bit afraid to stick my toe in the Red Sea. It looks forbidding, but God is saying if we'll just move forward, He's going to make this work. So I understand the reluctance. I am aware of the might of Pharaoh's army. But I'm hearing God say, now, Does that sound like the way a preacher ought to sound? That we're the ones continuously saying that? Now look, those Egyptians, those Hebrews, did not have to put that toe in the water, did they? No. Every one of them could have turned right around and marched back. Moses' job was simply to say, God said, you can make your own choice here. We need more preachers willing to say, God says. Not me, God says. And let that lead. And then it's Jesus. I was listening to Table over here talking about how others have stolen our sales pitches on a variety of things. And then they're right. They sort of have. This was something that 50 years ago, the church was pretty much the main benevolent organization in an awful lot of our communities. You know, if tornado hit or whatever else hits a community, the churches all rallied together to sort of be the saving grace places. This is where stuff happened. And if you're going to have a feed the hungry sort of thing, the churches kind of work together cooperatively, and they did. Now, you've got this 1.5 million nonprofits, many of them doing some of that same stuff. But our venue was in the beginning, and it is still ours and ours alone, and that is that we are called to make disciples of Jesus Christ, and it's all about Jesus. It begins and ends and is in the middle, Jesus. That's what we've left out. It's what we've left out. And we have allowed our church people to make it about the church or the building or the time or the various odd other distractions, and to leave Jesus out of the equation. We cannot compete if we don't put Jesus first. That's the prize. And where we make it the prize, we'll beat them every time because they don't know Jesus like we do, and they're not called to represent Jesus like we are. It's where we'll win if we'll bring them back there. I want this whole discussion on sexuality in the church to begin and end with Jesus. I don't care how many states have voted what the hell they voted. I don't care. That doesn't matter to me. Jesus is what I want to discuss. I don't care what the Supreme Court's going to say. Jesus is what we need to discuss. That's where it goes. Now, I don't know what that's going to lead you to. It may lead to two different things in two different churches because we have not yet seen the full light. But the discussions center around Jesus instead of around, but I've gotten to know more folks who are gay. And they're not so different. They're like me. Or I have a sister. I have a brother. I have an aunt. It's Jesus. What does Jesus say to us in the midst of all this that says this is how we should respond? And how have we come to determine that? And it should be something other than, well, I've been watching the news a lot. How have we spiritually arrived at where we are? And when we can have that discussion, then we might find the church folks in Atlanta somehow being able to lie down with the church folks in Pasadena. If a lion and a lamb can do it, God knows maybe they can too. But the common platform is Jesus. That's what we've left out. And that's what we've got. If we want to compete for the dollar, if it's all about money, it ends with Jesus. That's where you can win. And that's what you've got to stay on. Nobody's going to beat you there. You got to compete with leadership. Leadership controls just about every organization. One leader can affect the whole masses. You look at sports, and I'm trying to think of a successful sports team in Pennsylvania. The Steelers?
Winning Super Bowls from our
The Phillies? We have one of the best football teams money can buy. They're just not professional, as you might think of it. No, but you know, we've all seen how one coach can alter the whole direction one way or the other. One leader, one quarterback, one person who can do that. Leadership is massive. I'm a big, Civil War buff and read a lot of stuff like that, and it was amazing how the lack of leadership with the Union Army controlled what the entire war went like until Abraham Lincoln finally picked the right leader. Army stayed the same, changed the leadership, and the tide of the battle, began to change. Leadership, and we don't pay enough attention to it within our churches. When you are getting leaders within your church, I want you to think about what nonprofits think about, and nonprofits choose leaders around what they call the 3 Ds. Anyone who's going to lead here needs to be a doer, a donor, and a door opener. That's the criteria. In other words, they're involved in our organization. Okay? And let's just say Boy Scouts. So we're putting the board together for the district council board of the Boy Scouts. Who do we want? We want somebody who's been a doer in Boy Scouts. They know our mission. They're involved in our mission. They have been a scout leader. They are a scout leader. They're a doer. They understand the mission. And they've shown it by being, they've involved themselves with it. They're a donor. This person doesn't just show up. But when we've had our annual fund, we had our capital drive to build the camp building, etc., this person was a donor. They are contributing. They put their money in it. Not just their time, but their money. And they're also door openers. These are people who can introduce us to other people who have influence and abilities to enable us to grow in influence. They can even connect us to others who might connect us even to others. They're doers, donors, and door openers. Now, when we're choosing leaders for our church council, for our finance committee, for staff parish, do we look at the 3 Ds? Do we say everyone here must be a doer? They must be in worship. They must be in small groups. They must be in some type of discipleship experience where they're growing, a Bible study, a small group, or something else. You can have kind of your own criteria to judge that. But are they able to give us guidance from a platform of truly knowing our mission? I went to a church as a pastor and was told that this doctor in town, who had now retired as a physician, but, was really the bell cow of the church. We've kind of always followed, Dr. Dink's, what he says. He's kind of been the big kahuna here. And I looked there, and Dr. Dink was on the board, and Dr. Dink was on staff parish, and Dr. Dink was on finance, and he was in all the key controlling areas of the church. Oh, okay. And then it wasn't too long into this that I discovered what Dr. Dink did was to come to worship with his wife on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock for 1 hour, and that's all he did. Now, he did it most Sundays. But when we were making decisions about staff, he had no clue what was going on in the rest of the church. When we were talking about Sunday school, he had not been in a Sunday school in 30, 40 years. When we were talking about missions, he had not ever been invested in them. We talk about children, youth ministry, space. He hadn't even been in parts of the building other than parked his car, walked into worship, and went home. Now that's okay, but that's not okay for key leadership because he doesn't understand who we are. And the leadership he was giving, however well intended, was harmful because of his lack of knowledge. I've certainly been in plenty of churches when I explored it, had people on finance committee that were not donors. They hadn't invested that. So when we were talking about increasing giving to the church, they always had reasons why this or that won't work. Why? Because they weren't going there themselves. And then we had people who were on there because, well, she's awful sweet, and we don't have any females over 86 on this committee, and we got to make sure we have at least 2 of those. We'd have some men over 86, but there aren't any; they're all dead. But we've done this for the sake of diversity, etc. Diversity was not one of the 4 Ds. Now I'm treading here, okay? I know I'm on thin ice here. Because diversity almost equals faithfulness in our church now.
Yeah.
Okay? But when we have made it a premier aspiration, we have sacrificed oftentimes the mission. There is not a thing wrong with diversity, and where diversity can be accommodated and the mission not subjugated, I am all for it. But you don't ever do anything for any reason that would subjugate or put the mission second. And it's what we have done. You need people who will help you succeed in your mission, first and foremost. And if they don't fit those 3 Ds, they're probably not going to be helpful and to some extent could be harmful. To me, it doesn't matter if all 6 of them, if they're all white, if they're all black, if they're all purple, green, yellow, I don't care. Striped for that matter. If they're able to help us do the mission, that's what we really have to get done. And that's where we haven't. I had a call the other day from a Wesley Foundation. We need help. A whole lot of my conversations start with that. We need help. And they start by telling me, here's what we need. We need to raise this amount. Why do you need? Well, the annual conference has cut us way back. We've lost a bunch of our funding. And we got to raise money. Okay. Well, tell me about your board. Well, our leadership on the board was appointed by who? Guess who? The annual conference. I said, well, what criteria did they use? They're Methodist. So what criteria do you suppose they used? Diversity. 1 from each district, equal numbers of males, females, appropriate representation of ethnic representation, age was, there was several things she went over. Clergy, lay, all of this was counted. Okay. Which the clergy crud may be the worst diversity thing for these boards, the worst thing in the world, because they hadn't got any money.
And they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, and they don't know what they're doing. That's true. But that's the criteria. And I said, well, is anybody put on there who can help you raise money so you can live? No. No. Well, that's real helpful, isn't it? That's just real helpful. And you know what we're going to do? The day we bury your Wesley Foundation, it'll be the best looking, most diverse funeral we've had around here in a long time. And we'll all gather around your grave, equal clergy and lay and whatever else, you know. But see, what good does it do to bury the darn thing? It was to live, to make disciples out of college kids. And they had folks who thought that's a good idea, but not one clue in the world how to go about doing it. And they certainly couldn't write checks. nor could they influence those who could write checks. They were not a fundraising board. And I said, the first thing we're going to have to do is to completely destroy your present board. We need resignations from every single person, and then we have to build it back. What's the problem with that? The annual conference controls the members. Okay, so back up now, we have to go get the powers that be to sign off, etc. So, but I mean, this is just so common when we get these calls, and we're getting a lot of them now from Methodist institutions who have been told, you now must carry your own weight because we're getting less apportionment dollars to hand out, but they're totally unprepared to do it because nobody ever set them up with leadership that knew how to lead a nonprofit. Don't get your church like that. First thing is the mission. First is the mission. Stewards all. They've got to be stewards if they're going to be in leadership. They have to understand it's not about them. It's about God's resources that I've been given a responsibility to lead with. You have to learn to develop a level of intimacy with your leaders, and they expect it and want it. It astounds me the reluctance that many of our clergy have in developing intimate, close relationships with powerful people. Powerful people who can be doers in your churches, key donors in your churches, and heavy influencers. You know, you all know who some of those people are who, if they called you today and said, you know, we need to get together for lunch, that you're going to move up higher in the week on that lunch than others, right? There's just folks that are that way. That's who you want around you, that they can make those calls and contacts on behalf of the church to get others invested and connected. That takes intimacy, it takes relationship, it takes one-on-ones, it takes your getting to know each other. And a part of my experience has been that many of our clergy are far more reluctant to know the wealthy and or the powerful than they are to know the poor and the downtrodden. And I don't see Jesus neglecting either. Zacchaeus was the richest guy in the crowd and the most powerful. Maybe not legally, but he was the most powerful, the most connected to the government. Zacchaeus. And who did Jesus say, I must go to your house? The most powerful guy. And it said all the crowd went, boo, 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 boo. And some of yours will too. But those connections are vital and important to have if we're going to compete. Those are the ones who can make the most happen the quickest. But you need to know them. One of the areas I struggle with our bishops the most is that bishops will move into areas and 3 or 4 years after being there, they'll call me and say, we want to have an area-wide campaign and we want to raise a lot of money for this, that, or the other. And one of the first things I say to those bishops is, Bishop, let's talk about who you know. What do you mean? Who do you know that has the wealth, power, and ability to make this happen? Well, now our DSs are getting together a list, and they're going to bring it by. I said, no, who do you take to lunch a couple times a year? For what? To talk church, because you know they've got as much influence or power or ability to write a check for the Methodist Church as anybody in your conference. Who are you taking? Well, I never really thought about that. But I'd be happy to if somebody can introduce me to them. See, it's too late. It's too late. Those relationships needed to start early. That then when you needed them to really assume a position of influence, they were there and ready to go for you. But they didn't develop the intimacy. Don't be afraid of that. There's not a thing in the world that makes that evil to your going every other week and hitting all the nursing home people. You don't sit around and think, oh, why do you do that? Because that's good ministry. Okay? They need you. They can't come to you. They need a little more touch than the average Joe and Mary out there. In the same light, this person gifted uniquely with wealth and money and power needs considerable more touch sometimes than the average person does because of the burden they have been given by what they have. All right, I want to finish this one, then we're done. Notes. I have found with these types of persons, sending a handwritten note to them, leadership, anyone who's in leadership in your church should be hearing from you, about every 3 months, just a handwritten note. Hey, thank you so much for that comment you made at the board meeting the other night. That really was helpful in moving that along, or in keeping us focused, or helping make this happen. I appreciate all you do. Hey, thanks so much for that contribution you made. Those things are incredibly helpful, and they take such little time if you'll just but focus yourself and, have something on your desk to remind you. Need to send a note. Just send a note. Okay. Listen to them. Bottom line is you need people in leadership in your church who have been to the Emmaus Road, not to Wall Street. You need folks who know Jesus, not money, because you're in the Jesus business, not the money business.
Amen.
And most of our finance teams are made up of people who've been to Wall Street, not the Emmaus Road. All right, we're going to stop right there. Yes?
How do you communicate with the leadership? The idea of the 3 Ds. How do you go to nominations or anything and say, we're not gonna, all the leadership, we want all the leadership to have these 3. How do you do it in, how do you practically do that?
Basically hardly any of this is practical. I get paid to come and say it, but I don't have to go do it, so this is a piece of cake. I thought I'd just go there before y'all did. Again, I think what you have to do is to begin to develop a core around you who understand the changes that are being made. And those changes can begin with how we have been doing business as a whole has not produced for us as it should. We're looking at changes. I've explored these books, these references, these various things. This is much of what they say. I want you to look at it with me because we have got, if we don't do something different, we're going to keep getting the same results. Everybody says okay. And then you begin and you inject this as you look at other things. But one of the things that I always did very practically to help this happen is that by being the chair of the Committee on Nominations, which all pastors are, I was able to ask my church, and I did it in my very first year before we ever have a meeting. I said, I would like for you to grant to me veto power over anyone that you think may serve, trusting that as your pastor, I will not do that without believing that the church as a whole is better served without this person right now for a variety of reasons that I need to keep confidential. That can be your knowledge of how they give, your knowledge they're going through a divorce, your knowledge they just lost a job, your knowledge of anything can influence that. And you simply have to ask for that trust. And when I would veto, I would say something like, I do not believe at this time that's going to be the best place of service for them. There are very few places that would believe that it is better to impose upon a pastor, a leadership team, than to allow a pastor to help form. Sink or swim, with your folks. And so I was never denied that. I always had it. I tried to work, behind the scenes. I would tell the nominations people, I would say, look, here's some things I look at. So before you bring them up, or anyone up, if you want to just talk to me on the side, I'll let you know if that's workable or not, so that we don't get into a discussion about Sally Sue in a big committee meeting. And just a few conversations aside with my nominations people, they'd do that and they'd call me and said, hey, this new guy that joined, I was thinking, why don't we do such and such, you know. I would hear about it before, we could talk about it, and then we were in agreement. Very seldom did it then come up in the meetings itself. It was one of the things I did. Never had a problem with it. It worked well. Okay. Are they still working on a question here? Yes, sir.
More of a, you put notes up there, and just something that has been useful for me.
Yes.
It has to be a sustainable process.
Yes.
Is I got postcards made up.
Uh-huh.
You don't have to stuff them. You don't. It's
Yep.
less postage. It's less cost. And if you have a letter that only has this much on it, it looks like there's a big waste of paper, or that you should write
Uh-huh.
postage. If you put it on
Yes.
a postcard, it makes it look like you filled it all out, even
Yep.
if you put very few words.
It's great.
And it's sustainable.
That's great. I used note cards. I did have the envelope, but same thing. I didn't want the big letter because I wasn't going to be writing 3 or 4 paragraphs. I was going to thank them for teaching first grade and 4 sentences and all that. But it's excellent.
First thing in the morning.
What?
I do it first thing in the morning.
Okay,
When I
good.
commit, I greet.
You sitting down? Okay.
I greet the rest of the
Yeah.
staff. I get a cup of coffee. I write 2 notes. I'm done.
Okay.
And it's just part of the morning discipline. And so I at least get 8 notes out a week.
You know, I will hear probably more feedback as I go around after I've been to places like here, and I've been up here a dozen times, with Jack. As I'm circling around, more preachers will stop me on the side, or we're just eating, and said, the thing about writing notes that you talk about, and oh my gosh, we changed a half dozen things, but the thing I will hear about will be thank you so much for sending me that note. And you're thinking, well, they are so thrilled, and that probably took me 3 minutes. But it matters a ton. And now, when she really wants somebody to do something, you've got a much better chance of getting a yes out of them because you took 3 minutes and thanked them before. You'll just be amazed